Welcome to another edition of Eye on the Issues. Today, we are once again talking spent nuclear fuel, nuclear waste, if you will. Joining me today is Johan Swahn. Now, he's got a great resume. Sir, you're the former director of MKG, the Swedish NGO Office for Nuclear Waste Review. You've also been with Nuclear Transparency Watch. Welcome to take time today. Thank you for taking time today to talk to me. Give us a little bit more about your background. With those organizations, what have you done?
Well, I work in Sweden, and MKG has been working for 20 years for the Swedish environmental movement on nuclear waste issues. I just recently retired, but I'm still a senior advisor to them. And also on the European level, Nuclear Transparency Watch is an organization which is interested in the safety of nuclear things generally, nuclear power, nuclear waste, and so on. I also have a background at university. I'm an engineering physicist, and I have a PhD in global science, technology, and global security.
Excellent. So today, of course, we're talking because the state of Wyoming, two bills came before the state legislature, but they were in respect to the possibility of storing spent nuclear fuel in the state of Wyoming. And that's why we're talking right now. And I know you've got a very interesting background, and I know you've done a presentation not that long ago about what Sweden and Finland are doing in respect to storing nuclear waste. Can you explain what the two countries are doing?
Yes. Well, first of all, you have to differ between storage or long-term storage and then moving towards a more final solution in a sense like a repository. Now, both Finland and Sweden have had nuclear power since the 1970s. And as most of the countries, we have been very, very slow at moving ahead to a repository, even though both in Finland and Sweden, we are closer to that than most other countries. But in Sweden, we store all the spent fuel in one place. So we move it from the reactors to a central storage site at one of the reactor sites. So we have 4 reactor sites, and one of them they move it along the coast with a ship to a central storage site. So I assume it's sort of similar to what is happening in the US now, where they are now, I guess, dismantling nuclear power plants, and then all that you have left on the sites is the spent fuel.
Let's, if we could, talk to me about what you believe the successes have been in. You can talk about Sweden and Finland. I'm not sure if there's one that's better than the other, or if they're both doing the same thing.
Well, they are very similar, also in the way that the country works, like the culture of the countries, and there's quite a large trust, I think, in the public towards, let's say, the government or let's say even the nuclear industry to a certain extent. But it's still important to understand that it's been very difficult to site any sort of nuclear facility, especially waste facilities. And the only places where they are sited in both Finland and Sweden are right next to nuclear power plants. And I don't know what's happening in Wyoming, but I would suppose that there is no nuclear facility exactly where they want to, or so it's almost like the Nevada problem with Yucca Mountain, where Nevada has no nuclear power, but the rest of the US wants it to take all the spent fuel in a repository. But what has happened in Sweden is that I told you that there is a central storage place for all the spent fuel. We only have 12 reactors. I mean, in the US, you have many more. Those 6 are still operating. So it's much less in total, the spent fuel in Sweden, and even less than in Finland, which only have, at the moment, 5 reactors, but these have 4 reactors. But both countries have actually been moving along towards a spent fuel repository also. And Sweden in the 70s started a project to um, because they needed it for siting, basically, or actually approval of licensing of reactors, because there was a big nuclear um, discussion in Sweden in the 70s. And what happened was that a company was formed to find a solution for the spent fuel, and they have been working for a long, long time. And the last 20 years, the time MKG was formed, it was formed because the government allowed the environmental movement to have some resourcing to participate in the review process, licensing process. So I followed the whole process then for almost 20 years. And in the end, it was actually approved by the government. And also, they're still waiting for an approval by the regulator. But basically, in Sweden, they are expecting to start to build the repository. They've already started to do some groundwork, but actually to the repository, it may be 3 or 4 years' time. And then it will take 10 years to finish that. And then in 50 years, then they will maybe deposit the first spent fuel. What has happened in Finland, though, is that the Finnish have a different way of decision making. The Swedes, I think, we see the repository project as an environmental project, but in Finland, they see it more like an industrial project, and they have come much further, actually, even though it's the same method. So in Finland, they have a repository built underground, and they're waiting for a license to start operation. And in both countries, we use the same method, and it's basically you have the spent fuel put into copper canisters, and then the copper canisters are put about 500 meters underground in holes in tunnel floors, surrounded by bentonite clay, and then the whole system is filled up with clay. And there's been a big controversy in Sweden. Also, it has spread to other countries about copper being used as a material. And my organization was quite central in this, together with very eminent corrosion experts at the Royal Institute of Technology in Stockholm, who were very much opposed to using copper as a canister material, because this has to last for 100,000 years, and the spent fuel has to be isolated from humankind and the environment for 100,000 years. And the idea with copper was that it would be like gold when you put it underground. But in reality, it appears like the chemistry is not the same for copper as for gold. And therefore, you have very, very good scientists saying that this could actually start to leak in some 100 years or 1,000 years, which is much, much faster than it's supposed to work.
So let me ask you a couple questions about what you just said. Why did they choose copper? Do we know?
Yes, because the idea is that when you have copper underground, there is no oxygen in the uh, after you close the repository, the oxygen is consumed very fast, and if there's no oxygen there underground, then there will be no corrosion. I mean, you know that, for example, you have roofs made of copper, and they become green, and actually you probably have to replace them after 50, 100 years. There will be some holes in them, and you have to redo a copper roof. But that's just because there's oxygen in the air, of course. So the oxygen is a problem. And the idea with the copper was that there is no oxygen underneath the ground. When you go down to those depths, after the repository is closed, it's consumed very fast, and therefore it would be like gold after that. And gold
Interesting.
would work. I think you could do it with gold as for the canister material, but it would be a bit expensive.
Yes, it
So
would, without question. Now let me
yeah.
ask you this. Um, in Finland, for example, not Sweden since they haven't done it yet, but the underground repository, do you know, did they put sensors underneath and around the area just in case to find out if there's going to possibly be a leak at some point?
Well, the idea is that they will not. we don't know finally what will happen. They have done it. They are doing experiments in Finland, as in Sweden, with copper, even like complete copper canisters. Uh, and the problem, we haven't seen the results in Finland yet because they've just started with those kind of tests. But in Sweden, we've had a hard rock laboratory. Uh, so there they have already done a lot of tests on copper. And the problem we find is that the copper doesn't look like it's working. So you see a lot of corrosion on the copper, even when the oxygen is not there anymore. And people are not really very certain about this. It's quite a complicated chemistry down there, but they think that it's possible that the copper surface will be attacked by water molecules. And if you know your chemistry, it's not very difficult, the chemistry, but the water molecule is hydrogen and oxygen.
Sure.
So if the water molecule is split by the copper surface, which would be like a catalytic reaction, it's possible that things happen that are not, let's say, thermodynamically thought to be possible. If that happens, then there is oxygen available, and the hydrogen will move away from the copper surface. So it is there are explanations to explain why copper will not work. But of course, the companies that are working with copper, the spent fuel company in Sweden, SKB, and Posiva, the company in Finland, they are, of course, all very much against this being possible at all. So the copper corrosion controversy, it's still ongoing.
Right.
But in the case of Sweden, at least, the government decided to give approval because the regulator in Sweden thought it would not be a big problem even if the copper did not work entirely as it depends, of course, how bad it was, but they see the repository system with the copper and the clay around the copper canisters and the bedrock itself as a holistic system.
Okay.
And if you do modeling, you will find that if you're lucky, at least, the whole system might work anyway, even if the copper, which we think is pretty
Fails.
crazy way of approaching a very serious issue like this. So we have been very critical of the regulator because
Right.
of this.
I get it. So let me
These
ask you this.
projects, yeah, yeah,
So in the United States, I know some of the talk has been if they're gonna build a repository in the ground, as opposed to it going straight down, the idea would be possibly put it into the side of a mountain so that you could access
yeah,
the spent nuclear fuel if there's a problem.
yeah. Well, I think that all these kind of mined repositories are a problem, and it will be even a bigger problem if you have it very more easily accessible. Because I think that the long-term risk of these repositories is that there will be intrusion scenarios that we can't know about what will happen in society in 500 years, 1,000 years. So at least in my thinking, uh, as long as you have these mined repositories where people might think there is treasure down there. I mean, we know how people have been, for example, looking at the pyramids, for example. I mean, if you put a sign saying "Don't go in there," of course we will go in there, and so on. So the intrusion scenarios are a problem, and the only thing that my organization has been considering as an alternative to these mine deposits has been the use of deep boreholes instead, where you would drill down to maybe 3 to 5 kilometers, and because of the geologic and hydrologic conditions at those depths, it's possible that it will be more environmentally safe, but also uh, less easy to get down
To
to, and
access.
it will be,
Sure.
yeah. So the intrusion scenarios are less for that kind of borehole
So
repositories.
let me ask you this. What about above ground storage, even if it's considered temporary? What are your thoughts on that?
Well, there is one thinking, which is that um, you not only for short term, but also for long term, you have like a rolling stewardship idea, that you instead of trying to put it underground, you will have it above ground, or and for example, in the Netherlands, they've already now, because they have so big problems with geology in the Netherlands, they have decided to wait for 100 years before doing anything at all. So they have built a big building there where they have all the spent fuel above ground in a building, and they are basically just waiting, and they're repainting the building every 10 years to show that there is something is slowly happening, because there is a
Right.
slow decay, of course, of the radiation inside. But 100 years is nothing compared to 100,000 years, of course. And the problem is that this kind of idea of rolling stewardship, it's very difficult. If you had the intrusion problem, because you don't know what's happening in 1,000 years, to try to think about having society managing and keeping the information about the spent fuel for such long time frames, it is very difficult to do. Um, um,
So
you still
let me
need
ask.
actually to have these kind of rolling stewardship, because if you have a mine repository, you also have to put information to the future and so on. So it's just basically, why did we start this to start with, in a
Hmm.
sense? We started those reactors without any idea about what to do with the spent fuel, and the problem has been much more difficult than those people, I think, there ever thought it would be when they started in the
Eh,
50s and 60s. So
Right. Well, let me ask you this. What are your thoughts on the reprocessing of nuclear fuel? Why is that being considered or thought about in Sweden and Finland or in other places that you know of?
it was thought about in the 70s, because it was seen as a delay of the problem, in a sense. If you send it away for reprocessing, then you wouldn't have take, you get the high level waste back in glass, vitrified waste, but you didn't have to think very much about it, maybe for a longer time. But basically, reprocessing is just creating a lot of mess and waste where it's being done, and it only makes it more expensive. So it's, I mean, there's also the reason why the US did not. The US actually, um, I think it was the Ford administration that tried to stop the world from reprocessing because of the nuclear weapons proliferation problem.
Right.
And that was why Sweden actually stopped our plans for reprocessing, because of US pressure. At the same time, the US allowed the spread of technology for building reactors, which Swedish um, reactor makers could license and build the Swedish reactors. So the whole problem of non-proliferation, nuclear proliferation, comes with the reprocessing also. But as I said, it's more expensive. It creates much more a mess when you do it, and
Mhm.
um, it's not. It's, I mean, it's still being done in France, in Russia, in Japan, where Japan they're trying to start their reprocessing plant. They have big problems in doing it, because it is not so easy either to do the reprocessing, apparently. Um, so reprocessing is not something that the US, for example, should do. I mean, it should listen to itself what it said in the 70s, I think,
Mhm.
if there's any idea about reprocessing in the US.
Sure, sure. Do you have any opinion on the small modular reactors that they're developing and starting to build, apparently?
Well, there is, I mean, in Sweden, we have a government at the moment that are very keen on nuclear power. Um, this has become almost like the climate policy for the government. They don't. There is a like in the US, there is a lot of um, uh, they say
Pushback.
controversies, and I mean there's a polarization about all issues in Sweden also, and in energy there's also polarization, and because the previous government was very positive towards renewable energy, the present government is very positive to nuclear power. But going back to your question of the modular reactors, to build new reactors in Sweden, it has to be heavily subsidized by tax money. And that's building the existing types of reactors, which are the least expensive to build. And modular reactors, they don't even exist yet, that's to start with, but they will, per energy production unit, be very much more expensive than the bigger reactors, who are too expensive to build without extremely high subsidies. So it's not really a way forward. I've seen, I mean, if you read in the media now, you see that some of the oligarchs that do data processing centers, for example, they are thinking about having nuclear SMRs there. Sometimes you wonder about the tech sector, whether it's actually more interesting because it's sort of seen as high tech, because the economy would not be there. It would be terrible, actually. In Sweden, we have a lot of data centers, and they are here because we have a lot of renewable energy in Sweden. So they are really green in that sense. And it might be even difficult to sell data centers with nuclear power as being green.
Right.
So I don't think there's very much of a future for the modular reactors, no.
Gotcha. All right, last question for you. If you could go back 50 years and give advice to it was in an infancy at the time, the nuclear energy world, what would your advice be? Let's say we go back to 1970. What would your advice be in 2 sentences or 3 sentences?
Well, first of all, we have to go back 75 years to the 50s and 60s, because that's when the decisions were made. And the advice basically is that there will be so many problems. So this is not the way to move forward. It's understandable that people are worried about fossil fuels and so on. But if there is a movement to make renewables, it will go much faster and much better than nuclear power.
Understood. Well, Johan Swahn, I really appreciate your time. If people want to go to any websites and look up any information from Wyoming about nuclear waste and spent nuclear fuel storage, do you have any sites you suggest?
Well, you can go to the MKG site, mkg.se for Sweden, SE, and there is an English site there, and there you can follow the Swedish discussions and debate about nuclear waste. If you want to know more about the SKB, the industry site, skb.se, there they have also English information about how in Sweden we manage the spent fuel, including then the intermediate storage site. Yeah.
Understood. Okay. Well, folks out there, if you're watching this, you want to find out more about what's happening around the state of Wyoming, go to wyliberty.org, sign up for our newsletter. Johan, thank you so much for your time today.
Okay. Thank you.